What's up, Mikey?
It's a good word.
Not much here. Another day, another dollar, as you like to say.
Another day, another dollar.
All right, so I heard you found an article you want to discuss. And actually, when you told me about it, sounds just what we love to talk about.
Yeah, it was an article about e-commerce and KPIs, and I thought it would be a good conversation to talk about metrics that are relevant.
Maybe the most important conversation for e-com businesses, no?
Yeah, I think it's you start looking at Google Analytics without a goal, you'll go down these rabbit holes for hours and hours and really come out with nothing. And I think if you go into analytics and you don't know what you're looking for, most of the time you're going to come across metrics and you're going to immediately start thinking, oh, it's bad or it's not relevant or it's, things aren't performing. So I think it's really important that you set goals, or at least you have an outline of KPI or whatever metrics that someone's looking at, and you say, okay, this is what's important to the business, here's why, and then you start looking and optimizing for those metrics. And I think that's probably the best way for start looking at metrics, at least at a starting point. I mean, I think no matter what stage a business is in, there's certain metrics that are always going to be relevant. And then I think some metrics are more important than others at different stages.
Yeah, I think one of the main things and to point out, which you kind of touched on, is that for almost every business, there's going to be different goals. However, all these metrics are important to any business, right? So why don't we start going through what I believe are 7 key KPIs.
All right, so the first is cost per acquisition. What are your thoughts about it?
I mean, this is probably the single most important KPI, right? You have to keep a very close eye on this all the time. I mean, even if you watch a show like Shark Tank, it's probably one of the first questions they always ask. What's your cost per acquisition?
Yeah, I think it's important. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's the most important. I think in many ways, the lifetime value is the most important. If you have, depending on the business and certainly most e-commerce businesses, if you have any sort of funnel or cycle or upsell or downsell or cross-sell, the cost per acquisition is going to be important, but it isn't necessarily the most important. And I think it's also based on what channel. Now, cost per acquisition for the most part is calculated on the cost divided by the number of transactions that you would get from that specific channel. So your cost per acquisition, you could have a cost, one cost for Google, and then a different cost per acquisition on Pinterest or Facebook or any other channel that you have, and then at the end of the day, you would take your total amount that you spent versus total sales, and then you have a sort of a blended rate, which I think is in many ways important. But it is important to look at cost per acquisition, in my opinion, on a channel level, and then compare it to how do those people perform for a lifetime value. Like, for instance, if you have a low cost per acquisition through Facebook and Instagram, but the average order value is significantly smaller, or whatever, maybe you find that they're buying certain products that are more problematic or not as profitable, then the low cost per acquisition isn't necessarily the most important. What do you think about that?
I stand corrected on that. Lifetime value is probably a better metric to look at when you're looking at acquisition cost. I would 100% agree with that. Nonetheless, I personally look at cost per acquisition almost on a daily basis. I mean, that really gauges a lot of and drives a lot of the marketing. Again, I agree on the lifetime value, but the thing is that that's a number that also takes a long time or have quite a bit of data for companies to get to that number.
100%. It could take years.
Correct. So the cost per acquisition is something that is the most important in the sense that, again, I think it drives a lot of the marketing strategy. It drives a lot of the marketing budget. So that's why I said it's the most important, just
Sure.
because it's always on top of mind and the main focus. But
Yeah.
yeah, once again, I do agree. Once you do have that number or a baseline lifetime value, then you really drive your marketing based on that.
Right. The tough part about customer acquisition alone is that it can vary from, I mean, even just, day parts, maybe you have higher cost of acquisition during the day or at night, but even just, week to week or seasonality, especially in e-commerce where, your cost of acquisition could go through the roof during the holidays, but then drops on during the summer. But, if you understand how to use that cost of acquisition and know when to optimize, maybe you pay a little bit more. You don't actually have to always have the least cost, because maybe if you're willing to pay X dollars more than your current cost, you could get inevitably more sales. So I think that's, to me, where cost per acquisition comes in. So the next one, so this is probably one of my favorite ones to talk about, but it's ROAS, return on ad spend. I specifically like to go along the lines of return on investment, because I think it's not just a specific ad spend that you would be calculating. I think this sort of ties into the lifetime value. You might not have as high of a return. You might, spend $1, and if you spend $1 and you make $10, then you're at 1,000. At 1,000 times return, or 10x ROAS. So you just take the total revenue divided by your cost. But looking at it from a whole, I mean, you have different touch points. So just by looking at your return on investment from Google Ads or Facebook ads alone, I don't think necessarily sees the whole picture, unless for whatever reason you're only running on one channel and people buy right then and there. What do you think?
I mean, this is obviously a KPI that's extremely important to any e-com business, any business really, not just e-commerce, of course, and something that, again, I do closely monitor on a daily basis. It's what really helps me optimize and drive the marketing and
Right.
really scale it.
Yeah, there's a report in Google Analytics called the Path report, which I often look at it, and it shows someone came in through Google Analytics, they came in through Google Ads, they went to Facebook, then they came through an organic touch point, and you can see how those all play into the role. So even if you have a higher cost per acquisition, at some point, if your Facebook retargeting is what gets them to buy, then you're not going to see that by looking at Google Ads alone.
Well, that's a really good point, and I think we actually talk about this a little bit on one of the first episodes.
Yeah.
Not that we're so many episodes in. We talked about that all this kind of ties into the attribution, right? So that's a good point, to think about return on ad spend as well, is the attribution that the ads.
Sure.
And makes it really tricky. But again, that's something we do touch on. We'll link to it somewhere.
Yeah. All right, next is bounce rate. So I look at bounce rate in a different capacity than what most people just take a look at it and say, oh, well, bounce rate. I think that a bounce rate anywhere from, in the, low 60s to, 74-75%, I think is pretty typical. Once you get above 75%, bounce rate, you probably have something wrong, or the page is ranking for something wrong, or the user's coming to the page and not getting what they're expecting. And alternatively,
question. What does Google consider the bounce rate in terms of what's a bounce? What has to happen for the bounce to be considered a bounce?
So it's a little bit of a black box, but specifically, I believe it is when someone comes to a page and they leave within, I want to say it's 30 seconds, but it could be 10 seconds. I want to say it's within 10 seconds.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so it's got to be within 10 seconds.
I might even argue that it's less.
It could be less. It could be less. Maybe it's 5. I don't know. Let me pull it up in Google Analytics. I'll circle back to this in a second once I pull it up. But so now alternatively, if your bounce rate is whatever, under 60%, you probably have a tracking issue. But I'll tell you where I like to look at bounce rate is to see what pages have the highest bounce rate and then optimize those pages to make them more friendly. Because if people are coming there and they're good pages and they're ranking for the right keywords, but the user's getting there, usually it means that they're not getting what they're expecting, or that's where you can dive into Search Console to see why is that page ranking for a specific term.
Okay.
All right. Check out abandonment rate. Why don't you talk about that? All right. Check out abandonment rate. How many people come to the site, put a product into a cart, and then abandon? I think it depends on the site. Sometimes people use, especially large sites that are retail oriented for many categories. Oftentimes people will use shopping carts as a wish list. So I think that this isn't necessarily a metric that you want to 100% rely on, but it is a good indication to see why are people abandoning. If you're getting carts with a couple items and the consistent items, oftentimes maybe people go looking for coupons, or they get stuck, or they don't see what they need. So that's a good place to start optimizing the cart to put the security badges in, or to put a link for your return policy. I think that there's a lot that can be done. Again, you can do that through the funnels and Google Analytics. But anything that
where in Google Analytics can one kind of like optimize for this? Is it in the goals section of analytics?
So there's two places. You can set up a funnel directly under the e-commerce in the advanced e-commerce section for the tracking under the admin panel, or you can go into goals, and under the funnels you can sort of build out your own funnels. I'll set the goals and then I'll sort of track them through Data Studio, and it lets you see where exactly the drop-offs are. And sometimes it's interesting to see where you get the biggest drop-off, even just between categories. So if you find one category gets significantly higher abandonment rate, you can start looking to see why, or if if it doesn't correlate with sales, maybe people just aren't finding the right product. Or
do you know the average checkout abandonment rate, what the average is?
I don't know what the average is, but I think a lot of it would depend on who the customer is, the average order value. I think if it's something like furniture, I think you're going to have a much higher abandonment rate because it's more of a commitment. I think if it's something like a t-shirt, it would probably be far less. Well,
actually, that question might come into our next KPI here.
The conversion rate.
Yep.
So that's total transactions divided by total visits. Now, conversion rate, I think a lot depends on if you're a manufacturer or retailer. I think manufacturer are naturally going to have a higher conversion rate. I think a lot of it will depend on the channel. Typically, organic is going to have probably the highest conversion rate, then followed by direct traffic, and then somewhere between Google and social will take the rest.
From your experience, what channel has overall channel
for conversion rate?
Highest conversion rate. Let me see if you're going to say what I'm going to say.
Overall, the highest conversion rate. So I would go one step further and break it down into new customers or returning visitors. Typically, if it's returning visitors, I would think that email probably would have the highest conversion rate. But for first-time purchasers, I think consistently organic would have the highest conversion rate. I mean, again, it depends on how new the site is. I mean, if the site's day one, you're probably not going to have organic traffic. But for a site that's been established for a little while, organic should yield the highest conversion rate, or they're just not ranking, which I guess is a separate problem on its own.
So it's always been said typically the average e-com conversion rate is about 1%, maybe a little higher. You think that still holds true today?
My guess is probably a little bit higher just because there's more and more brands and manufacturers that are going direct to consumer, and those sites have trust that would probably make the conversion average increase. I think, I mean, from experience, the large ticket items, whatever, a few $100s to, in the thousands of dollars, that will typically have a far less, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, again, I think it's important to break it down between desktop and mobile, and again, these conversion rates, any of these KPIs, it's more than just the overall metric. I think the overall metric is something good to have an eye on. Conversion rate specifically, though, I would look. I wouldn't look at just one number. I would look at desktop and mobile, especially if there's high ticket items, computers, furniture, high-end clothes, something like that, because more people will start off the journey browsing on mobile and finish on desktop. So even still, I would certainly look at conversion rate, and I'd also break it down into tablet because a lot of people look on tablets, but the conversion rate, you could have a ton of sessions on mobile and it just doesn't convert, bringing down your conversion average overall. But you start looking at desktop alone, it might be converting very well.
Have you ever seen any e-com site convert better on mobile than on desktop?
Yeah, if you have I don't know, if you have like a handful of products. I mean,
I've seen like lead gen service based. Of course, people are on their mobile, they fill out a form. Of course, conversion rate is very high, but still till this day, the reason I bring it up is because there's so much, and rightly so, and always about, mobile first, focus on mobile, focus on mobile. But if someone's starting out e-com and has a very limited budget and has to choose, okay, what device can I target to really scale or maximize the revenue, I would say all day you really bet everything on desktop. That's where I see the sales happening. Now you have a point with, top of funnel research starts through mobile, but desktop has a much higher conversion rate in my experience.
Especially if you're new, I would agree with that because,
I am talking about new mostly.
Yeah, so if you're new, no, but I'm saying like if you're a brand new website, people are probably going to be doing research on it, unless you're selling, a third-party retailer selling something that someone knows, in which case they're coming in for price. So if you're not the lowest price, you're going to have a lower conversion rate. But if someone, and it also I think depends on where, how someone comes in. If they're coming in through AdWords because you have a very specific keyword that you're targeting, and you're the lowest price, and they're buying because of price, and whatever you're selling a headset, and it's trustworthy, it should convert much higher. But and I don't think it would necessarily matter on the device. But I 100% agree with you. If you're just starting off, I mean, desktops, you're going to have a higher conversion rate, but you also need to be able to get people into the funnel, especially if you're looking to scale.
Yep,
If you're limited, then
that brings us maybe to our next KPI.
Opt-in conversion rate. Yeah, it's a great one, often overlooked. There's certainly value to getting users to sign up into your funnels, email addresses. So certainly, I mean, there's plenty of data points to look at it and to optimize. And once you get them in, now you can start tracking them on where they go. So if you find that someone is going to a specific category, it's super easy to be able to send very targeted emails. So if you see someone's going in, if you have a lighting store and someone's going into your ceiling fan page, you can start sending very targeted emails that will convert much higher if you start sending people ceiling fan emails. But if you start sending them, crazy chandeliers, that's not really what they're looking for. So you can't really be surprised why that doesn't actually convert. But overall, seeing how many people you get to give you their email address, and not just email address anymore, now, phone number as well to do SMS marketing. It's definitely shows high intent for people who haven't purchased. And you can do, marketing. I know you have a handful of funnels for people who just get into the top of funnel.
Yeah, and I think this has been such a incredible way to scale, especially for those that do not buy on first visit but do opt in. I mean, just this is it gives you such a good opportunity, as a brand, as a retailer, to educate the customer on a product that maybe they're on the fence about or whatnot. And I think it's such an important metric to keep a close eye on this, right? Because if your metric is low, maybe your pop-up message is off, and it's so important to A/B test all this stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of opportunity out there, and getting someone into the funnel. I mean, sometimes people are looking for stuff and they're just not ready to pull. So, this gives you a great way to stay on top of mind, and you're not spending money on ads for retargeting, or gonna bombard them for something that they're just not ready to purchase at that time. But sending targeted messages, creating value, I think it makes it very easy to get them to sort of make that switch when they're ready.
And yeah, just to make note that we can talk about all these that we're going through for a long time and dig deep, but we're just trying to get through them.
For
Um,
sure.
so much detail that one can get into with these KPIs. So I think the next one's the last one, correct?
Next one's the last one, product revenue. Very important.
All right. Why do you think it's very important and listed as the key KPI?
Because there's a lot of other activities that people can take on the site. But it's not so much of the overall product revenue that you really want to look for. I think it's looking for products that are underperforming, that are either very high in profit, or as a business you would think that they would rank higher, because maybe for whatever reason a specific set of ads isn't showing the right ad copy, or the page isn't ranking for the right uh, keywords, or you don't have the right email funnels built out. I think that there's a lot that you can do by seeing, okay, we're selling this many products, or we're not selling this many products, and then even break it down into by channel. Why is certain products not selling? And then you can either continue to build out those funnels and scale it, or you can take it as, okay, maybe this product just doesn't sell well through social, so find a different channel or a different social network to be able to sell those products from. And then you can, you can do all sorts of things: email placement, product placement. There's a lot to do, but understanding what products are important to the business will help drive your strategy for it.
Most business owners, or even any marketing department, they kind of, you would already know that information. I think where it's key, and I think you touched on it, is if you can narrow down by channel to see where the product sales are coming from or not coming from, right? And I think that's where there's a big value in that KPI.
Right. Everyone talks about scale. I got to do this at scale, scale, scale. But, so part of being able to scale is to be able to, know where to focus to build out smaller, more targeted campaigns. Because at that point, when you have a good funnel that works on a small group of people, at that point, oftentimes, especially when it comes to paid search, you just start spending more, and naturally your very slim funnel will scale to higher revenues, higher transactions, more traffic.
You just have to say scale, and it's the buzzword, man. You gotta
Yeah.
scale.
Gotta scale the campaigns.
Everything is scale, scale, scale. It's what it is. It's what drives all the conversations in every company, and what are you gonna do?
Scale. That's what you're gonna do. It's just so easy now. You can your target. It's not a billboard game. You're not guessing that someone's gonna drive by and want your product. You do your targeting.
It's not easy to scale, though. It's not easy
No, it's definitely not easy to scale, but it's very possible to scale.
Yeah, 100%. But you gotta have the right strategy. It takes a lot of experience. I've been doing this for a long time. I've made so many mistakes, and I've started a business that I was not able to scale too. So, even, you just a lot of things have to fall in place. You got to be looking at the right things. That's why all these conversations are so important to have, and also serve as reminders what to look for, what not to look for, and those type of things.
Right. And one thing to build off what you just said, at the end of the day, doing the work for a small company versus a growing company that is scaling, there's not a whole lot more. I mean, depending on the business, there could be more on the back end operation standpoint, but from a business standpoint and a marketing effort, it's not more work as you scale necessarily. I mean, essentially the work's going to, in theory be the same, whether you're selling to 100 people or 1,000 people. I think it's just something that people don't put enough time into planning on how you're going to get to that scaling point. They start off all sorts of places. I'm going to do a little on email, a little on social, and then you have a whole bunch of little fires, and you're not really able to get that big fire that's driving a ton of traffic, and then you see burnout and everything else.
Now, before we end the convo on these 7 KPIs, you think there's one? Can you think of one that maybe we haven't talked about? We don't have to dig into it.
Yeah.
Which one?
Average page value.
Good one.
Yeah, that's one I like to see. What page has the most value, and then take away, why is this page converting so much? Obviously, you got to factor in if it's, a key product, but then you start looking for pages that don't have much value.
I'll throw one in there to end the convo that I actually was working on today. I was looking at all the blog posts by conversion rate. So page by conversion rate, specifically on content articles, and based on that metric, build out email campaigns. Because I know if it's driving sales and converting well through the organic search, through an email, it could also perform really well.
Yeah, 100%. And certainly when you have large sites with lots of page visits, obviously you got to just factor in, if a page has a higher conversion rate with significantly less traffic, driving up that page in traffic. But yeah, I mean that's a great strategy to build. I mean, something like that's probably where you should start off if you're going to build out an email campaign. You don't just write an email post. Why? I mean, there's plenty of opportunity to find places to build from.
Those are 2 really good metrics to look at if anybody finds it helpful. All right, good stuff. Good stuff.
Until next time, Pablo.
Until next time, Mikey.
All right, bye.